Well, good evening. Good to see you all. And now we have about 6 hours of material to cover this evening. And then there is the final exam. Yes, you're correct. So don't plan getting home tonight, but rather sometime tomorrow morning. Bruce, yes.
I would say, just for those of you who don't know Andy Bannister, I was looking on Amazon. He's got a new book out called How to Talk About Jesus Without Looking Like an Idiot. A panic-free guide to having natural conversations about your faith. If anything like his other books, it'll be well worth the read. I'm going to get it now.
I think that's what he's speaking on, that may,
Oh, okay. Great.
out
Okay,
in the
that'll be
street
wonderful.
corner.
Yes, okay, good.
Well, this summer I'm going to do a presentation on the Scopes trial. This is the centennial anniversary of the infamous Scopes trial of 1925. Talk about, speaking of Christianity looking foolish, there'll be a lot to talk about in that regard. And so I'll be doing that in a lot of different churches. And but wanted to let you know, we'll try to schedule something here at Johnson Ferry as well. I think you'll find it extremely valuable and informative, and it was certainly the trial of the century, not these celebrity trials, O.J. Simpson, people like that. I mean, this truly was the trial of the century. And it's going to generate an awful lot of publicity this summer. And of course, it's going to be interpreted by non-Christians and skeptics as a decisive blow toward the credibility of the Christian faith. And so there's a lot to talk about in that respect. And there's been a lot of mythology and historical revisionism related to the Scopes trial. So we'll try to clarify all of that. And what if that something similar to that were to happen today? Now, back in 1925 in Tennessee, the state legislature had passed a law outlawing the teaching of evolution, Darwinian evolution, in public schools. So I will present another scenario in which everything has been reversed. And now, of course, it's special creation that's not allowed in public schools. And probably the most famous quote from that original Scopes trial was a very liberal ACLU attorney by the name of Clarence Darrow. Maybe you've heard of him. And Darrow's most famous comment during that trial was it's absolute bigotry to only allow one view on origins to be taught in schools. He was right in that both views need to be integrated, of course, and taught. But of course, ever since the secularists, the anti-Christian group, got in power, now it's still just one view being taught. And it's just, again, the whole scenario's been flipped. So I'll keep you posted on all that. Very much looking forward to doing that. And so, like I said, we'll schedule something here at Johnson Ferry or maybe other churches nearby. So Bruce has reviewed the text for that presentation, and appreciated your comments and your input and everything. All right, so as I said, we've got several things to talk about, and very much looking forward to Donna's presentation as well. So I'll try to go through the introductory material here as quickly as possible, and Donna will make her presentation, and then we'll finish up this evening on some other key points in your study guide. Now, if you are following along in the study guide, I'm going to make a few comments on something we talked about 2 weeks ago. That's a long time. If you're like me, I can hardly remember there was something 2 weeks ago. But if you'll turn to page 33 in your study guide, the Cambridge connection, and again, some of these comments are going to be things that you recall, I'm sure, but they're necessary to move on in our study. Now, I mentioned on a couple of occasions in our course that despite his great notoriety there at Oxford University, Lewis was not very popular among his colleagues. And we've talked about why that was the case. Some of it was just jealousy, some of it was just hostility toward Christianity, and so on. But in the early 1950s, now he had been there at Oxford by then for over 20 years, 25 years. And in the early 50s, he was passed over on several occasions for academic promotions. And again, his colleagues were just hypercritical of his work, and they disapproved of his Christian worldview perspective, of course, and so on. So in 1955, he leaves Oxford, and I'm not sure how far it is from Oxford to Cambridge, maybe 100 miles or 80 miles or something like that. But anyway, he transferred to Cambridge University and continued his career. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we also talked about, you see the section there on page 33, Joy, and, or I'm sorry, we're moving on to page 34 in your study guide, Joy Davidman. And we talked about how in, she will eventually become a good friend to Lewis, and eventually, of course, they will even marry. But she read an article in 1946 in an issue of the Atlantic Monthly magazine that was entitled C.S. Lewis, Apostle to the Skeptics. And she thought, well, that's interesting, because she was as skeptical as anybody could possibly be. But she found it just really intriguing. And she had, as I said a couple of weeks ago, a very colorful background, although it's mostly a red background. In other words, she was raised by communists, and she was a hardcore communist herself. Her parents were secular Jews. They had immigrated to New York City from Eastern Europe. Her father was what was called in England a Fabian socialist. And following the stock market crash in 1929, Joy herself became an atheist, declared herself to be an atheist and a communist, okay? And as she later recounted in her autobiographical essay entitled The Longest Way Round, she says in 1929, now you can tell from this brief quote, she's quite a gifted writer. The content aside, but just her style. She says, in 1929, I believed in nothing but American prosperity. Now, that was right before the Great Depression hit, of course. In 1930, after the Depression, I believed in nothing at all. Men, I said, are only apes. Some act like, well, that's a different issue, but men, I said, are only apes. Virtue is only custom. There is no absolute moral values, it's all just personal preference and so on. She says life is only an electrochemical reaction. Mind is only a set of conditioned reflexes. And anyway, most people aren't rational like me anyway. Love, art, and altruism are only about sex. The universe is only matter. Matter is only energy. And I forget what I said energy was. So she's on a real roll until you get up to that last sentence, okay? In 1942, she meets a man, William Gresham, at a Communist Party meeting in New York City. And so she fell in love with him, and he with her for a while at least. And so they really felt like, they were on the fast track to success in life. But she experiences a conversion to Christianity. In 1947, her husband leaves her and their two sons, and she's absolutely stunned at that point. And as she later wrote in her autobiography, again, it's entitled The Longest Way Round, quote, God had been stalking me for a very long time, waiting for this moment. He crept nearer so silently that I never knew that he was there. Then all at once he sprang. For the first time in my life, I felt helpless. Again, her husband's just, deserted her. For the first time, my pride was forced to admit that I was not, after all, the master of my own fate. All my defenses, the walls of arrogance and cocksuredness and self-love, behind which I had hid from God, went down momentarily. And then God came in. Since childhood, I had been pouring half my energy into the task of keeping God out of my life. When it was over, I found myself on my knees praying. I think I must have been the world's most astonished atheist at that point. Um, and then she encounters the writings of C.S. Lewis and begins to initiate a correspondence with him. And to her shock and surprise, he actually writes her back, as he was very prone to do. And Lewis was very impressed by Joy's writing and by her wit. And they began a very, very lively correspondence. Meanwhile, her marriage totally faltered. And so in 1952, December of 1952, she travels to England to meet her spiritual mentor, C.S. Lewis. They immediately meet, and their relationship really clicks from the outset. Lewis really enjoyed her spontaneous nature, her very quick wit, and her clever mind. And so he was so impressed by her that he invited her to come to the Kilns, where he lived, of course, with his brother Warnie, for the holidays. And there she met Warnie. And I like this quote from Lewis's brother Warnie. It's one of the few quotes I've ever been impressed by from him. He says, "We treated Joy just as if she were a man." And so that was his highest praise. This is a slightly, chauvinistic society we're talking about back in those days. All right, so we'll pick up on that. But first, I'd like to have Donna come up and make her presentation on a book that he wrote in 1955, Till We Have Faces. And this is one of relatively few books that Lewis wrote that I've never read. So please illuminate my heart and mind. And very much looking forward to your presentation, Donna. This other one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
My technical.
Oh, I can do this.
You did it earlier. I don't know if you shared it, but.
No, I mean,
that was-
yeah. I think this guy. Well, come on.
There you go. I think it's, is
But
it sharing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's sharing, but you just stand in front of the computer and smile.
Sorry.
All right, those of you in Zoom land, if you have any issues, please speak up.
No, we can see it.
Okay. There you go.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Paul. I couldn't do anything without him. All right. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I'm so excited to talk about this book. There's so much to it, so there's just no way I can get to all of it. But so anyway, like we said, we have the book here by C.S. Lewis, Till We Have Faces. Many, when you read about it, they say it's his greatest work, including Lewis. It was his favorite book that he wrote. And this book brings together many, if not most, of the important themes of Lewis's life. We've talked in class about his different genres of writing: allegory, fairy tales, apologetics, science fiction, essays. But this novel, it weaves together all of these various narratives into one fabulous mythic book. I must admit, I've been a bit obsessed by it for at least, I don't know, 8 months. I found it in a bookstore, in a used bookstore, and picked it up. I'd never heard of it. So this is what it looks like. I'd never heard of it. I said, "Oh, look, a book I haven't read by C.S. Lewis, a novel." So I picked it up. I thought it was obscure. So here, wait, I have to go back though. I said I was really excited. I was really glad it was in Jeffrey's class. And Allegra's not here, but Allegra had mentioned it as, oh, there's John now. Anyway, she said it was one of her favorite books. I'm like, oh, I'm not alone. So I didn't think that many people had read it. So anyway, I picked it up and I've been obsessed. And when I first read it, I found it strange and confusing and a bit dark. And I also knew that it held deep meanings and themes that I did not understand. But again, thinking it was obscure, and after reading it, I just put it aside. But oh my, was I wrong about its obscurity, and so right about its deep themes and meanings. This is going to sound like I'm wandering way off track, so y'all hang with me for a minute though. So earlier in this year, ever since I read Rod Dreher's book, Living in Wonder, that came out about a year ago, I've been really captured by this idea of re-enchantment, supernatural. Oh, thank you, dear. Told me to change my my thing. So about the capture of re-enchantment of our culture into a large extent Christianity. And by that, I mean embracing the inherent supernatural elements of Christianity and the Jesus story, and working to incorporate these things into my life and opening the eyes of others to it. So, and I also realized that other new and current Christian voices have been talking about the same thing, but in slightly different language. And one of these new voices, again, that sounds like I'm going off track, his name is Jonathan Pageau, who largely is known because he's a good friend of Jordan Peterson. But he's either an Orthodox Catholic or Eastern Orthodox. Quite frankly, I couldn't quite pin that down, but he's an icon carver, and he teaches symbolic and mythic stories and the themes that connect humans with each other and with the divine. So anyway, he has a website called The Symbolic World. And on that website, there's a course there on Till We Have Faces. So when I heard that, I'm like, oh, well, gosh, I have to take this course. So of course I did. Well, I haven't listened to all of it. It's actually an 8-hour course, 4 classes, 2 hours each. However, the first hour or so of the first lecture, she spends teaching about Lewis's creative process and about how he came to write Till We Have Faces. And it's so full of things that we've been discussing over the course of this class. I wanted to share that with you, and I hope that you find it as fascinating as I did. So to say the book is too thick, it's too dense, there's too much in it, there's just no way we could cover it. But I think that you'll find the insights into Lewis and his thinking, since this class is about Lewis, I think you'll find it interesting as well. But I also wanted to give out my big disclaimer. Now, I've watched the lecture, and the woman's name is Annie Crawford, and she's a Lewis expert. She was fantastic. Her first hour or so, I'm pretty much giving a report on her lecture. So the handouts that I sent out, they were from her course, and most of the quotes on the PowerPoint are from hers. Some are mine, the graphics are mine. I mean, I picked them off the internet, but the quotes are there from what she did. So I want to make sure and put that disclaimer out there. Don't want to claim somebody else's work. So let me ask, how many people read the book? How many have read it? Okay, 2. Okay, well, good. And then, well, okay, and Allegra, right? Oh, okay. By proxy? Yeah, okay. And then how many are familiar with the story of Cupid and Psyche? Okay. Moderately. All right, so I'll give just a teeny tiny, I'm not going to go into it, but so the book is titled Till We Have Faces, a Myth Retold. So it's based on the story of Cupid and Psyche. Lewis was interested in this myth from his pre-graduate days, and he thought the version that he read, which is by Lucius Apuleius, missed the mark. So in the original myth of Cupid and Psyche, I'm just going to do it real quick. Cupid is a god. He falls in love with the mortal Psyche. He ends up taking her away from mortal life, building her this magnificent castle and jewels and beautiful clothes. And she's there, but part of it is she can't see him. And about a year later, she begs to have her sisters come. Her sisters thought she was dead, but then they came, and they were very, very jealous of everything that she had, and eventually convinced her to betray Cupid, and then Psyche lost everything. Lewis tells it differently. He thought that the jealousy was too thin of a reason for her to betray Cupid. She loved him. This was her husband. Why would she betray him over something so minor? So his version was a little deeper, and he made the palace invisible to the sister. And the one sister that comes in his retelling is just the one older sister, and she's ugly. I mean, it's not to put it mean, but she's very unattractive. And of course, Psyche is the most beautiful mortal on the planet. So that's where he made the changes. But he first wrote it. He first read it in 1916. He had thought about it, but the book wasn't written until 1955. So over all of these years, so over the course of these many years, this idea was percolating for him. And also over the course of these many years, his beliefs are changing and growing, because of course this was pre-conversion and he writes it post-conversion. So his thinking on it changed over the years as well. All right, so that's a tiny little synopsis, but we're going to move on so we can look at like Lewis's creative process, which I thought was really very, very interesting. So we have the quote here, and I just picked one of his books out of The Silent Planet, but it said, in the author's mind, this is Lewis says, there bubbles up every now and then the material for a story. For me, it invariably begins with mental pictures. This ferment leads to nothing unless it's accompanied with the longing for a form. Verse, prose, short story, novel, play, whatnot. When these two things click, image and form, you have the author's impulse complete. And that was from that handout, sometimes fairy tales may say best what to be said. So for Lewis, his process starts with an image, but it doesn't go anywhere until he comes up with a form. So once he has those two together, he can write the book. I wanted to throw this in there too. So last time we met, we were talking about Narnia, and we were talking about it compared with Lord of the Rings. So I thought I just think this fascinating on how he came up with the idea for Narnia. So he says, some people seem to think that I began asking myself how I could say something about Christianity to children, then fixed on a fairy tale as instrument, then collected information about child psychology, decided what age group I'd write for, then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out allegories to embody them. Because this is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write it that way. Everything began with images: a fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first, there wasn't anything Christian about them. The element pushed itself up of its own accord. It was part of the bubbling, which I just thought was beautiful, especially, again, given after the conversation we had in our last class of how did you come up with that, and why did he come up with that, and how did it resonate? And it was from within, divine providence. So again, and also it seems to me it speaks of a true artist reveals meaning of the world. He doesn't impose it. And I think that truth was revealed to him to put in the stories for the children. So his creative process starts with the image. So again, till we have faces, it was the image of the palace that Cupid created for Psyche. And in the original story, the magnificent castle and all that was in it and the riches bestowed upon Psyche was visible to her sisters, thus the jealousy. Lewis's idea was for the castle and all the other riches to be invisible to the oldest sister, Arul, and for it to be told through this older, ugly sister. So in this, he had the image, but he could not land on a form. He tried his old friend poetry, which he really, really wanted to be a poet, but that didn't work. He tried as a play, that didn't work. So then he couldn't bring the image and the form together. So for many, many years, it lay dormant. Meanwhile, Lewis's ideas and beliefs and philosophies grew and changed. We can go. So we're going to talk about Lewis's history of overarching themes that he had in his life, that he thought about and wrote about in different essays in different ways that developed over the years that have come together in this book, in the myth of Till We Have Faces. And the driving theme that Lewis had was this tension between imagination or enchantment and reason. It's one of the primary drivers of the book. It's the idea of the schism between imagination and reason, or enchantment and reason. This brings us back to what I said in the beginning about fascination with this new theory of the loss of enchantment in the postmodern world and the need for re-enchantment. Well, clearly it's not new. Lewis had been troubled about it for a long time. We're just catching up. And he talks about it in many ways and many essays. But this particular quote was just fascinating. And she, again, this course I took, she said it came from Surprised by Joy, and I'm not sure where in the book, but where he says the two hemispheres of my mind were in the sharpest contrast. On the one side, a many island sea of poetry and myth, and on the other, a glib and shallow rationalism. Nearly all that I loved, I believed to be imaginary. And all I believed to be real, I thought grim and meaningless. So and it brought me back to his looking at Warney's little garden when he was young and his first taste of joy and imagination. But then, who knows, life circumstances, his mother dying, the horrible school, all of that just kind of beat into him that no, reality is just this grim, meaningless, empty place. And remember, he was an atheist. He ached for meaning, but without God in the world, there is no meaning. So that tension was there from long time ago. And as a kind of examples of where this kind of division you can see in different ways between matter versus mind, body versus spirit, reason versus imagination, objective versus subjective, fact versus value. So just different ways that the division in our minds and the schism that he felt and thought was there. So Lewis goes on to further explain the distinction between the two halves by revealing two modes of knowledge. Lewis called the two modes of knowledge contemplation and enjoyment, and how he saw those two ways of understanding reconciled honestly in myth. He explains this in that essay that I sent out, Meditations in a Tool Shed. I've included that in the handouts, but really, I don't have time to break it down, and quite frankly, I don't have the ability to do that. It's very deep, but I got it a little bit. So we can see in that he talks about the two modes, looking at, or from the outside, analyzing something, or looking along, as he called it, which would be the experience of it from the inside. And the vision he has for that, or the image he has for that, is he's sitting in a dark shed, and through the top of the shed, there's a gap, and the light is shining down. And he's sitting there, and you can see the shaft of light. You can see the width, the depth, the height, the dust particles. You can see the elements of it. So that's the analyzing from the outside. He goes, but then step into the light. Because once you step into it, the depth and the particulars you can't see. He goes, but you can see the light itself. You can look up through the ceiling. You can see the trees and the leaves and the sun. And that's the experience. So again, we have those two different things. We have the imagination and reason, or enchantment and reason, and then we have looking from the outside, analyzing, which would be reason, or the experiencing it, which would be the enchantment. So he kind of goes on to explain it a little bit more, like perhaps one example would be, let's say you have, for pain, this would be an experience. So you have a toothache. You have a toothache and you're in pain, or you can be on the outside explaining the neurology of pain. So you have the experience of pain, but while you're in the experience of pain, you're not necessarily studying the neurology of pain and how it affects your brain and what that looks like in your body. You could be swimming, and you can be swimming in cool water and feel it against your body and open your eyes and see the light. That would be the experience. Or you could be on the outside studying the physics of buoyancy. So these experiences, and he says that they're separated, and really we need them to be together. We need them to be connected. So he says, on experiencing and analyzing, human intellect is incurably abstract, he says. An example of this would be pure mathematics is that type of abstract thought. Yet the only realities we experience are concrete. This pain, this pleasure, this dog, this man. While we are loving the man and bearing the pain and enjoying the pleasure, we are not intellectually thinking about it. We're not analyzing it while we're in it. But once we do begin to analyze it, the concrete realities sink to the level of mere instances or examples, and we're no longer dealing with them as an experience, but just something that they exemplify. So it's kind of complicated, but that's split. So he says, this is our dilemma, either to taste and not to know, or to know and not to taste. Or more strictly, the lack of one kind of knowledge because we are in an experience, or to lack another kind because we are outside of it. As thinkers, we are cut off from what we think about, but when we are tasting, touching, willing, loving, hating, we do not clearly understand all of it. But the main point being this disconnect, the tension between reason, imagination, contemplation, enjoyment, experience, analysis, because he then comes to conclude, one, that this schism is there and that there needs to be a way, but the way it's connected to and the way that we're supposed to live, so that because moderns have this disordered thinking. When Lewis was writing this, we were more in the camp of too much reason. There was not enough of the depth of the intuition. I think now we may have flipped on the other side because it's all about the lived experience and not truth anymore. But he was concerned about the lack of depth. So he said we should live in the flow of the two in a balanced, ordered relationship. And he concludes that the partial solution is myth. So of this tragic dilemma, myth is the partial solution. He says, in reading myth, you are not knowing, but tasting. And what you are tasting turns out to be a universal principle. The moment we state this principle, we are admittedly back in the world of abstraction. It is only while you are receiving the myth as a story that you experience principle concretely. So it reminded me of, again, last week when our last class, we were talking about Lord of the Rings. And we were talking about, it may not be a myth per se, but it has so many mythic qualities to it. And while you're reading Lord of the Rings, you're just wrapped up in the story. You're wrapped up in the battle between good and evil, and little Frodo with the ring, and he's trying to save the world. And you've got the fellowship, and they're all friends, and they're loyal. And you've got sacrifice, and you've got love and hate and greed and tyranny and all of these things, and you're just wrapped up in the story. But then, and you're not thinking about all these meta truths when you're reading it, but after you read it, you step back and you go, oh, that's what that looks like. That's what sacrifice looks like. That's what loyalty looks like. That's what tyranny and hate look like. And you can see those, and it's these myths that develop these truths that transcend time, they transcend people, they transcend nations, that bubble up again out of these. So that's the mythic quality. So Lewis says that myth is the isthmus, say that together, which connects the peninsular world of thought with that vast continent we really belong to of experience. It is not like truth abstract, nor is it like direct experience bound to the particular. But then he goes on, of course, we've talked about this too, that he says that the ultimate myth is, of course, Jesus. Now, as myth transcends thought, incarnation transcends myth. The heart of Christianity is a myth, which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God, without ceasing to be myth, comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. So he connects all of that with the ultimate myth and truth. Okay. So all of that. So now we move on to this concrete element of the book. We have all these themes that he's been thinking about and writing about, and we can see come out of Lewis's beliefs. The elder sister begins the book by accusing and blaming the gods for all the tragic events of her and Psyche's life. She, of course, a rule, is blameless, and the gods are cruel, and they've done all this to her. So she has God in the dock, which is one of his essays. So she said that, and he, a part of that, she has God in the dock in the beginning. Quite frankly, she goes through this transition. By the end of the book, she's in the dock, just like Lewis when he was an atheist, God was in the dock. But and when he post-Christianity, when he wrote the book, he was in the dock, so he could see the difference. But he does say, I like this quote, the greatest barrier I have met is the almost total absence from the minds of my audience of any sense of sin. The early Christian preachers could assume in their hearers, whether Jew or pagan, a sense of guilt. Thus, the Christian message was in those days unmistakably evangelium, the good news. The ancient man approached God, or even the gods, as the accused person approaches the judge. For the modern man, the roles are reversed. He is the judge, and God is in the dock. So again, those themes that we've heard about, that he's written about, that he's put in this mythic novel. So now here we are, Till We Have Faces. Now the graphic here was his original graphic that he fought for, and he fought for every element on it. Apparently, there's a lot written about it, but he wanted the weird looking black thing with the red on it. That's the god in the book called Unget, and it was supposed to be a female god, but she was shapeless and lumpy and malformed. And then you have the other one that's supposed to be Aphrodite, who is the god of beauty, so or goddess of beauty. Anyway, so he was very particular about what he wanted that to be. So anyway, so how did he finally write the book and put all these ideas together? How did he get the image into the form? Well, it was Joy Davidman Gresham. She helped him finally come up with what the form was going to be. So in she had that written correspondence with Lewis, and then in a letter that she wrote in March of 1955, she describes how she and Jack and Warney were kicking around some book ideas and brainstorming, and apparently this book, the book that he had been, the myth that he had been thinking out for so long of Cupid and Psyche, they landed on a form of the modern novel. Next day after that, Lewis wrote the first chapter and had finished the book in 4 months. So after all those years, he finally came up with a form and was able to put it together. So all of it came together in one beautiful myth. And then I'm just going to do one more thing because you just have to see how it manifests. So the very first sentence of the book, he writes, this is the first sentence from Arul, the sister. I am old now and have not much to fear from the anger of the gods. I have no husband nor child, nor hardly a friend through whom they can hurt me. So in that first sentence, we have the 4 loves. Storge, no children. Philia, no friends. Eros, no husband. Agape, she disregards the gods and think they hate her. So just in that first sentence, he's incorporated that. And then even in the second paragraph, which I didn't put here, he has a reference, kind of a Job reference, talking about putting God on trial. So anyway. Then the book, of course, has got so much information, but that's it. So, all right. So,
Any protests or?
yes, Bruce.
How would you unpack the title?
Oh, part of it was, so Till We Have Faces, there's a line in the book where Arul says, how can the gods even know us when they don't even know our faces? And at one point he talks about how one of the theories of Lewis is our identity. One of the major themes of the book is identity and faces. And so she says the gods can't know us because they don't even know our face. And also in the book, Arul ends up after Psyche dies wearing a mask. She wears a veil the rest of her life so that nobody can see. She did it at first, I think, to she wanted to be able to walk amongst the people, and then it gave her a sense of power to have her identity hidden. So that was what it was, the identity and how it changes over time, how we get to know ourselves and how it comes full boat. Oh, yes, 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 yes. Yes. That would be it. Did that help at all? That I had read a little bit about that, about why the title, yes.
Well, sometimes having faces has been an issue of having a personhood, especially in old times,
Yes.
like in Rome. We all know 65% of the population were slaves, and they were literally not considered to be persons.
Mm-mm.
So that if you were picked up by the police, whatever the police function was, as a witness to a crime, for example, you would just automatically be tortured because they didn't believe that these normal people could have the sensitivity to understand what was true and what was false, let alone separate what was valuable to them and what wasn't. And
They were less than human.
You would just get
Yes.
their version of reality, which was the best thing to them, you know, that you didn't have that. And then this came from David Bentley Hart, and he said that one of the most extraordinary passages in the Bible is when Peter denies Christ for the third time and then is absolutely devastated by it and goes away in tears. This would have been seen as an artistic faux pas because someone like Peter, a fisherman, wasn't deemed by most of the readers to be someone to whom you would contribute these kinds of sensitivities and ability to respond. And then he has this wonderful phrase that said, in some ways, all of Western civilization grew from Peter's tears.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. Anybody else? No? Okay.
Can you just briefly differentiate between storge and philia?
Oh, okay. I think I have it here, and I'm not gonna, it just says
Yeah.
storge is natural affection, like that between a parent and a child. Philia would be the bond of friendship. Eros, of course, romantic or sexual love, and agape, the selfless, unconditional love as God to us. Yes. Okay.
Well, are we going to let Donna off?
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you. Oh, excellent. Oh, do I just hit escape?
Oh,
Or here, come
yeah,
call it. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, or we can just actually unplug it, can't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can, is that this one? No, that's that one. There we go. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, thanks, Donna. We could have spent the whole session on that. Yeah. Now, Lewis thought it was he thought it was one of his favorite books he ever wrote. The reviewers and critics hated it. Yeah. And so of course they obviously had their own agenda, different perspective, but he was so proud of it, but it got very poor reviews. So such are the realities of life in this world. All right. Well, if you're following along there in the study guide, we're on page 35. And let's see, I'm going to, for time's sake, I'm going to skip over his next book, The Four Loves, and also Reflections on the Psalms, and move on to the topic at the bottom there, an unconventional relationship, which is putting it mildly, frankly. And so this is obviously a reference to his relationship with Joy Davidman Gresham. And it's very unconventional. Later, as I said, he married her. And that became the subject of a popular play. Many of you have probably either seen the play or the movie, whatever, C.S. Lewis Through the Shadowlands. And in 1956, Joy's living and working permit there in England expired. So her only opportunity to stay behind in England was to marry somebody of British citizenship. And so either exercising storge or philia love, the difference between the two is sometimes rather slight. Lewis agreed to marry her in a civil ceremony. And this happens in April of 1956, but they continued to live separately. Again, he was just, legitimizing, or now she could claim English citizenship in that relationship. But 6 months after that, Joy fell and injured herself at home. And in the hospital, she was diagnosed with bone cancer. And she also had a malignant tumor in one of her breasts. And so the following month, she endured 3 operations. And at this point, Lewis apparently truly falls in love with her and resolves to marry her in the truest sense. And so he asked a couple of friends who were clerics in the Anglican Church, and neither of them wanted to sanctify this marriage because she was a divorcee, of course. And so he calls a former student to come to Joy's hospital room and pray over her. And when he explains the dilemma to this former student, who was a minister, the minister agreed to perform a bedside ecclesiastical wedding. And so a proper wedding, you might say. Now, after returning from the hospital in April of 1957, Joy and her boys then move into the kilns along with Jack and Warnie, of course. And Lewis is very concerned about her, physical condition and all. So he's constantly praying for her healing. And he even to the point that in Catholic history has occurred from time to time. He even prayed that he might take some of the pain on himself. Now, does that remind you of anybody in history, Catholic history in particular? Francis of Assisi, among others, okay, was to pray the same thing. But within a couple of months, a very strange thing occurs. Lewis begins to suffer from an acute case of osteoporosis. So he prays that God will take away pain from her and let him bear some of it at least. And he starts feeling a lot of pain not long thereafter. And according to their longtime handyman there at the kilns, Paxford, Lewis was in such agony that he was often unable to walk and had to be sedated with dope in order to sleep at night. And Lewis later remarked to a friend, the intriguing thing was that while I, for no discernible reason, was losing the calcium from my bones, Joy, who needed it much more, was gaining it in hers. So, an apparent miracle. And Joy recovers, although she recovers temporarily. But they're able to spend another 3 years together. And I guess one of the highlights of his life at that point, because he truly is in love with her, during that period. They were teenagers, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think they were only about 2 years apart, if I remember correctly. So late in 1959, Joy entered the hospital for a routine checkup and was diagnosed with cancer. And realizing that they may not have too much more time together, they embarked on something Lewis had never done in his life, and that is an extended holiday or vacation. They went to Greece, and of course he was a master of Greek history and philosophy, and so it was just the most invigorating and pleasant time for him. And one of the highlights of his life actually was an 11-day trip to Greece. But unfortunately, in May of 1960, Joy was wheelchair bound, and she dies on July 11th. And one of her last comments was, "Don't get me an elaborate, quote, posh coffin." She says, "Posh coffins are rot." In other words, what's the point in spending a fortune on a coffin? Okay. And then she turns to the chaplain and tells the chaplain at that point, "I am at peace with God." So this affects Lewis profoundly, to say the least. And so he's going to be very, very distraught about this, and we'll talk about the book that he writes not long afterward called The Grief Observed. Now, this is a very disturbing book, but I would highly recommend it to anybody and everybody. It's one of the most impactful books I think I ever read in my life. It's not a joy to read, but it's very, very profound. Now, on that, so you can imagine the discomfort, pain, and suffering he's feeling mentally and emotionally and so on. And he writes a poem related to his relationship with Joy. And again, how intimately, they were connected on every level and so on. And it's called As the Ruin Falls. And if you turn in your study guide to, I believe it's about the last page or one of the last pages. Moment here, I'll find it. Yeah, it's page 63 in your study guide. There's the lyrics to As the Ruin Falls. And back in the mid-70s, a great Christian songwriter, guitarist, singer, Phil Keaggy. Is anybody familiar with Phil Keaggy and his works? Oh, he was an absolute genius. And also, I knew a lot of these people back then, and he was absolutely one of the most humble and genuine recording artists that I ever encountered. So Phil Keaggy turned this poem that Lewis wrote into a song, As the Ruin Falls. So let me play that for you. It's kind of a long opening instrumental. I played a little bit of it. But have patience, and eventually the lyrics will emerge. I hope those of you joining us online can hear this. Scott, can you hear this? Can.
I can hear you. Have you started it?
Yeah,
I can hear it.
you can.
I can hear you. So
Okay. Can you hear the song, the music?
No.
Jeff, what
No.
song is it so I can play it?
As the Ruin Falls.
As the Ruin Falls.
You can read the lyrics there in your study guide if you can't hear it playing.
This flashy rhetoric about loving you. I've never had a selfless thought since I was born.
We can hear it.
And persevering and self-seeking through and through. I won't guard you, friends, merely to serve my turn. Peace, assurance, pleasure, all the goals I see. I cannot crawl 1 inch outside my proper skin. I talk of love, a scholar's care, it may talk Greek, but self-imprisoned always ends where I begin. Oh, that now you have taught me, but how late, my lad, I see the chasm. And everything you are was making my heart into a bridge by which I might get back from exile and romance. And now the bridge is breaking. I bless you as the moon falls. The pains you give me are more precious than all other gifts.
Well, I know we're very pressed for time, but I'd love to ask you, what did you get out of that? I mean, was there anything in particular that was particularly meaningful? Yes. Yeah.
Actually, just listening to George, no wonder there's that saying, it's better to have loved and lost
Oh,
than to have loved at all.
oh, great. Thank you. Very, very appropriate. Yeah.
That's great. How self-absorbed.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, we want God and others only to serve our terms. We can't transcend our egoistic nature totally, can we? Except through just constant confession and appeal to the Lord to save us from our own inherent egoism. Mhm.
And the pains we experience, I do have to try to remind myself, I can't see these pains could be for good. I just
Yeah.
trust that God knows.
Yeah.
But I can't, it's hard to grasp.
Yes, it is. And yet, in retrospect, oftentimes we realize that the pain and disappointment and failures in life were some of the greatest blessings, or at least God used them in a very creative and, effective way. Yeah. Mhm. Anything else? Yes, Bruce.
I often have made the point that there are two ways of loving something. There's loving something intrinsically for its absolute worth, and there's a way of loving which is instrumental. In other words, that there is something that I can use this thing to advance my agenda. And the funny thing about humans is that in almost all situations, except for the very, well, maybe not even except for, in almost all situations, those motives are mixed. So you may say, well, I saw a beautiful painting in the art gallery and I bought it just because I love it, right? Just for what it is.
Mhm.
But I could sell it in 10 years for twice the amount. And so even in our dealings with God, there's always often this, he says, always often this little bit, something held back. I want to do what you want me to do, but I'll choose to do this thing over here because I might benefit from it.
Yeah.
As opposed to that thing over
Yeah.
there, which I don't think I would benefit from. It's very, 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 very complicated issue.
Yeah, I want to serve you, Lord, and I sure
Maybe-
hope you
maybe
bless
chase,
me
but not-
as a result.
Maybe chase, but not soon.
Yeah, as Augustine prayed for apparently a very long time, Lord, make me chase, but not today. Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts on that? I see some comments here on the line. Phil Kagi is still alive and making great music. He is a wonderful person. I knew him back in the late 70s, of course. And in fact, we had just had our second child, and we named him Ryan. And I was talking to Phil Kagi, and he was talking about a great tragedy in he and his wife's life, that she had just miscarried a child. They were going to name their child Ryan. So, hmm. let's see what else here. Excuse me just a moment while I um,
Jeff, I just
yeah,
posted a link to the music so the people online could hear. That's what
yeah,
that link is. It's a YouTube video with Phil Kagi.
yeah, great. Thank you, Andrea. Those of you online can watch the video at the link
It's
above.
an interview with, what's his name? Malcolm Keats? Anyway. Looks interesting, but the song's in there.
Yeah, yeah. Were you familiar with Phil Kagi back?
He played
Uh,
Orange Sunburst West Fall guitar, for the electric at the time.
Yeah.
And I had to have one, so I went, because Phil had one,
Oh,
I went and got one.
so you were a fan. Well,
And I just bought it.
yeah, I mean, this guy was compared to Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton and people like that in terms of his musicianship. Yeah, yeah, very, very gifted. Well, let's move on here. Now that post is kind of blocked. Okay, we've got about 20 minutes, so if I talk like an auctioneer, I think maybe. All right, now if you're following along again in the study guide, we come to a grief observed on page 36. And at the time of Joy's death, he hadn't journaled for several years. But with her death, he sinks into very deep despair. Again, remember, he'd never had a, quote, normal relationship with a female his whole life until he's in his, well, mid-50s. And she comes into his life. And so he's very, very distraught. And he begins recording his inner thoughts in what eventually is going to become this book, A Grief Observed. And years earlier, before enduring his own personal bout with existential anguish, Lewis had written that bestseller, The Problem of Pain. And if you read that book, I mean, it's like all of his theological works. It's very good insights, very valuable book. But it really looks at the issue of pain and suffering in this life through the eyes of a moralist studying the problem rationally and in a clinical setting. And there's value in that, okay? Great truths. But nonetheless, it's different if you yourself have experienced that on a very, very deep existential level. So after having experienced absolutely excruciating pain over Joy's suffering and death, he writes this book of Grief Observed. At the time, Joy had appeared in his life. Lewis was a bachelor in his 50s. His life was well insulated from pain and from emotional risk. There used to be a great book reviewer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution back in the 70s, 80s, maybe even into the 1990s. His name was Michael Scooby, and occasionally he would review movies, and he was really a gifted writer. His movie reviews were better than their regular movie reviewer at the AJC. And sometimes he would review books. And he apparently was very much taken by C.S. Lewis. And so he wrote one column on one occasion saying, and he's referring to Lewis and the emotional, the fact that he had been very removed from any kind of intimate relationship, and so he was living almost exclusively in his head, you might say, rather than his heart. And Scooby wrote this. He said, "This was the public moralist who, in books like The Problem of Pain, waxed very eloquent on doubt and pride and sin of every kind. He wrote lucidly and eloquently, but with scant understanding of despair," because he'd never really experienced it, well, I guess since the time his mother died when he was a little boy. and none whatsoever of love between a man and a woman. He'd never known anything about that till recently in his middle age. Only when he was face to face with Joy's mortality did he realize the depth or even the nature of his feelings. There's somebody who's pretty disconnected, for most of his life. A Grief Observed began as a record of his private mourning, his crisis of faith, and his recovery of faith. How many of you have read that book, by the way, A Grief Observed? Have you? No. Oh, you have, Jennifer? Allie? Okay. I would recommend it highly. But again, it's not necessarily a pleasant read. The book was first published, in fact, under a pseudonym. He didn't want to use his own name, fearing that a lot of people who considered him to be kind of a spiritual mentor would lose all faith and trust in him. So he wrote it under the pseudonym N.W. Clerk. No idea where he came up with that name, but because it was so intimate, so personal, he couldn't bear to publish the book under his own name. And when he first passed on a copy to a good friend of his, who later became a biographer, George Sayer, Lewis simply commented that the book was written by a man I know. It was only reissued under his own name, in fact, in 1964, so 3 years after he wrote it and after his death. Now, like a couple of other pretty profound books on a similar topic, Philip Yancey's Where is God When It Hurts? Perhaps you've read that. Or Harold Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People. A Grief Observed offers consolation for, frankly, the inconsolable. Following Joy's death, Lewis felt both paralyzed and obsessed. He was heartbroken and obsessed in ruminating about his life, those few years he spent with Joy and the love that they had shared. And in the pages of the book, there is a barely controlled, especially in the first several pages of the book, there's a barely controlled anger. And it can be rather painful to read that, especially realizing it's coming from this great, Christian mentor, C.S. Lewis. For instance, here's an excerpt. Lewis writes, quote, "Meanwhile, where is God? This is one of the most disquieting symptoms. When you're happy, so happy that you have no sense of needing God, so happy that you are tempted to feel his claims upon you as an interruption, if you remember yourself and turn to him with gratitude and praise, you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms from God. But go to him when you are in despair, when you're desperate, when all other help is in vain, and what do you find? You find a door slammed in your face and the sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, all you hear is silence. There are no lights in the windows. Was it ever inhabited in the first place? It seemed so once. What can this mean? Why is God so present, a commander in our time of prosperity, and yet so absent a help in time of trouble? So perhaps you've experienced some of that, yourself in your own life and all. He continues, not that I am or think in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. The real danger is of coming to believe such dreadful things about God. And at one point in the book, Lewis even refers to God as a cosmic sadist. In its own unique way, a very profound read. But I would not recommend anybody reading it when you're in the throes of despair. Okay. So. All right, so page 37, the fade out. Okay. Lewis needs to die before our class ends. So let's see if we can hasten his death. He referred to life in this realm of reality as a human being, with all of its joys and sorrows, beauty and ugliness, he referred to life in this realm of reality as the shadowlands, a murky imitation or intimation rather of the new creation awaiting us. And as I said, this was turned into a stage play and then a movie and so on. And but it really did not do service at all to Lewis's life. It basically, if you remember the movie from all those years ago, it implies that Lewis essentially loses his faith, okay, as a result of Joy's passing and so on. And nothing could be further from the truth. But for the period post Joy, Lewis's life was very anticlimactic after that. Life seemed relatively drab without his soulmate. In addition, these two boys that he was now their stepfather, and they were extremely difficult to raise. I mean, he had absolutely no experience. I mean, imagine starting to raise children, teenagers, when you're in your late 50s by this point, or nearing 60. And so he was oftentimes exasperated. Lewis, however, also reestablished a relationship, a very healthy relationship that he had with a woman, an English woman, who years earlier he had considered actually possibly marrying. So he liked her a lot. He liked, her values and everything, but he wasn't enthralled with her, wasn't in love with her. But he oftentimes confided in her, and some of his friends believed that if he had been in better health, he might have married her. But his health is definitely fading. Now, again, the next topic there in your study guide is an experiment in criticism, but again, for time's sake, I'm going to skip over that, and we'll look at leaving the Shadowlands. So this is C.S. Lewis. He's in the autumn of his life. And in June of 1961, he's having trouble urinating, and so his doctor discovers that he has an enlarged prostate. And in addition, his kidneys were infected and he was suffering from toxemia. Lewis had not maintained a healthy lifestyle. Now remember, I mean, we look at this man as very, very admirable in many respects, and he was, but he's still just a mere human. He's a mere Christian and a mere man, a mere human. And he doesn't live an exemplary life in some areas. For instance, when it came to his lifestyle, it wasn't very healthy. All of his adult life, he smoked and he drank excessively, and doctors doubted that he was fit enough for prostate surgery, so they inserted a catheter which drained into a bag instead. So I guess this is going to go on more or less for 2 years, I guess. So he's in great discomfort, but he retains a generally positive attitude. Again, by the time he had finished writing A Grief Observed, he was beginning to emerge from that depression. And so generally he has a positive attitude. His health actually improves for a little while from January of 1962 for the next year and a half until July of 1963. And in his last years, he reads as much as he ever did. He enjoyed rereading the great classics as much as when he first encountered them. So he reread the Odyssey and the Iliad and Plato's works and the Aeneid, Dante's Divine Comedy and things like that, and enjoyed them as much as when he originally encountered those books so many years earlier. He wrote to a friend, "Don't think that I am not happy. I am rereading the Iliad and enjoying it more than I have ever done." And in another letter, he comments, autumn is really the best of the seasons. And I'm not sure that old age isn't the best part of life. But of course, like autumn, it doesn't last. So in July, he suffers a heart attack and goes into a coma. And he resigns his professorship there at Cambridge. By the time August of 1963 comes around, he's beginning to prepare for death. And so he employs a young American, Walter Hooper, to collect and organize his correspondence and other writings. On one occasion, he invites a few, oh, this is typical Lewis. He invites a few friends into one of his book rooms in his house. See, there are people that have several book rooms in their homes. Mhm. He understands what walls are for. Okay. Well, I'm not sure about that, actually, knowing what I know about him. So anyway, he invites a few friends into one of his book rooms, and he tells them, please feel free to choose a book, as a keepsake. Very, very generous. And then this is what happens. His good friend and later biographer, George Sayer, asks if he can have the unspoken sermons by George MacDonald, if he can choose that. And Lewis suddenly looks very downcast, and he says, well, that's 3 books. So Sayer quickly withdrew his request and chose something else. You can have any book you want. Can I have these? No, that's not one. Okay. All right. So as you know, in November of 63, John F. Kennedy is assassinated on the same day. And so Lewis's death really doesn't receive a whole lot of media coverage, even in England. George Sayer, again, later biographer, writes that a lighted candle was placed on the coffin when he died, and its flame did not flicker. So it's just, static. For more than one of us, that clear, bright candle flame seemed to symbolize Jack. He had been the light of our lives. Yet, most of all, the candle symbolized his unflagging pursuit of illumination. Well said. Now, he still has this brother, of course, Warnie, who we have reluctantly referred to from time to time. Warnie was as unstable as ever, and he doesn't even attend the memorial service. George Sayer puts it this way, quote, Warren escaped in his usual way, lying in bed most all day, more or less unconscious, probably drunk. So in terms of postscripts, is that what I typed? Yeah. His assets are put into a trust so that there's plenty of money to educate his stepchildren, Douglas and David. And so let me move on real quickly because a formidable legacy. At his memorial, one eulogist describes Lewis as the best read man any of us is likely ever to meet. Another one referred to him as probably the most brilliant man in the world. His biographer, George Sayer, wrote, quote, he was known as a man of exceptional intellectual and even physical vitality. His flow of wit and humor and vivid stories told in his deep, rich voice was inexhaustible. He was a good listener as well, and he knew that he would never disclose a confidence, or we knew that he would never disclose a confidence entrusted in him. He was a man of his word and a man of integrity and a man of great honor. Jack was psychologically wounded as an adolescent and as a young man, but he went through a process of conversion that altered him radically. John R.W. Stott, longtime pastor at All Souls Church in downtown London, it's right near the BBC headquarters there, says that he was a Christ-centered, great tradition, mainstream Christian whose stature a generation after his death seems even greater than anyone ever thought while he was alive, and whose Christian writings are now seem to have classic status. In a Christianity Today article, interviewed a few years ago, Douglas Gresham, the younger stepchild, spoke of Lewis as, quote, the finest man and the best Christian I've ever known. Now, here's somebody who actually lived with him. And he calls Lewis the finest man and the best Christian I've ever known. He goes on to say Jack was very conscious of his own conceit. And you see that in the poem we just, the Phil Kagi put the music. He was very conscious of his own conceit, but I think he overcame that enormously because he always came across as the most humble of men. He was at times impatient and intolerant. He was also enormously conscious of his almost incredible intellectual gifts. When he committed his life to Christ, he realized that our intellects are given to us by God. So I think he overcame that sense of intellectual superiority as well. I don't know of any major vice that Jack took to his grave. So I'll close with this. One little known aspect of his life was his philanthropic generosity. And you would probably think, that's not that surprising. He always preferred to live very simply. And he set up a charitable trust called the Agape Fund. And he gave away an enormous amount of money. In fact, he gave away about 2/3 of all the royalty earnings that he ever made to needy people. So when he died, those that were going through his estate were quite surprised at how little wealth he had. I skipped over that, but anyway, I did want to mention that. So in so many areas of life, he was very, very exemplary. But he's a mere human, and so he does have flaws. And health-wise, they probably affect him pretty much. He dies, I think, he dies when he's 65, and really should have lived, quite a few more years. Yes, please.
Let me just support one thing that you said. I recently had a need to go through magazines that my mother had given us, trying to unload stuff. And she had numerous of the assassination attempts, Life magazine, other such magazines.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked through them, and you're exactly right. I never found a single sentence about Lewis. There was a paragraph in one of them about Aldous Huxley.
Yeah, Aldous Huxley died on the same day. Uh-huh.
But a whole lot, of course, Kennedy.
Well, I think the cultural elite in England, and this was true for most of his life, they were rather embarrassed because Christianity, that's old stuff. That's for previous generations. And we're modern people. And yet he's clinging to this 2,000-year-old religion. So I think that was the attitude of many of the cultural elites. Yeah.
If my memory serves me well, when Mother Teresa died, her death was overshadowed by Princess Diana.
Oh, is that right? So very similar scenario to this. Yeah. Good point, Philip. Yeah. Yes, Bruce?
Yeah, two things if I may. I noted when you talked about rereading things, and I always just wonder why God would find what happened to him in the instant he knows absolutely everything that has happened, will happen, could possibly happen, and so forth. And then one day it struck me, but I love to go back and reread stories that I know. And what do we read? What do we do the most? We go back and read the same stories that we know. So I presume that God gets joy. I don't know if he knows, right? At the unfolding of the human story, but that's a story that of course he knows very well. The second thing, and I often thought it should sort of be kind of a benediction on Lewis. I think it was Owen Barfield, I'm not sure though, I've never been able to find the quote. He said
Mhm.
that somehow everything Lewis ever knew, learned, was present in everything he ever said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
What a goal.
yeah. Well, I know he never knew anything about baseball. He never, much to my disappointment, he never commented on it.
Like,
Hey, wait a minute. We're going to have a discussion. All right. Scott Davis says, Beyond Nature. A song, Beyond Nature, is a great instrumental record by Phil Keaggy. Phil Keaggy's actually recorded 2 or 3 instrumental albums in his career, and it's definitely worth checking out. And Scott also says, thanks to Donna for her great presentation. Um, and what's the term when you cancel somebody from being able to communicate with you online? What's that called? Where you? Oh, I'm going to Scott, I'm going to unfriend you because you didn't say anything about my presentation. So, but I see you there. You're just being honest. I know that. I respect that.
I was gonna
So,
send you an
God,
email,
Lori.
Jeffrey.
What's that?
I think your presentation was fantastic.
Thank you. And by the way, the check is in the mail. So thanks for following through on our agreement. And this is for Dolly, Janet Verba, talking about that scene where Lewis takes friends into one of his book rooms. Janet says, I love walls. I have 13 bookshelves. So I hope you're taking notes on that. So, wonderful being with you all. And I just love, excuse me, love you all and have the greatest respect for you. You are people that take your faith so seriously, and that's very inspiring to me, and I'm sure it is to everyone who knows you. So it's a great honor and a privilege doing classes like this. And so I do hope and pray that we can continue on as we have for many years now. And originally, I had planned to do a course in the fall on biblical eschatology, and but not from the perspective that you've perhaps always heard when churches or pastors, talk about Bible prophecy and all. However, I don't know that I'm going to have enough time to finish up the preparation. I've put in, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say I've probably already put in, 100 or 2 hours. But that's right. I have a higher calling. Yes, yes. But what's taken up so much of my time recently and through the summer will be this series that I'll be doing on the Scopes trial and its significance, the legacy of the Scopes trial. It really damaged, I have to say, it really damaged the credibility of Christianity in the minds of most Americans. It turned out to be quite a fiasco. And yet there's very, very valuable lessons that we can glean from it, including the fact that Christian apologetics should be an absolute priority in our lives, so that we can accurately explain and defend what we believe, but even as important, why we believe what we do. And so anyway, we'll keep you informed when we start doing those sessions in various churches and other venues and all. So, but all right. Well, 'tis time to part. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, let's be. Yeah. Yeah. and maybe rearrange one of our book rooms perhaps. But remember why we're here at this time in history, as Millie is so prone to remind us, and as Paul preached so eloquently there in Athens in Acts chapter 17. God put us right here, right now, for particular reasons. So let's serve him wholeheartedly and very, very faithfully. This world of ours and this nation of ours desperately needs it. So sources of life. Good being with you. Blessings.
Amen.
Thank you all.
Blessings to you. Bye.
Thank you.